Big Data Analytics session. My name is Karen, and I will be your host for this track of Cisco Connect 2014. So we know that millions of data is being produced on a daily basis. So what does it have to do in the grand scheme of things? So let's all find out and watch this video.
We are really proud of our traditions, our innovation. The City Protocol Society is a worldwide initiative to provide open standards to manage the transformation of cities. Barcelona employs more than 40,000 people, offering services from social, cultural, maintenance of the city, and so on. To drive for these services in an efficient way, you need information. Big data offers the opportunity to improve quality of life and to improve also the development of economic activity. To our stage of festivals, in 5 days we have 2 million people interacting in the city.
Around the city festival, the citizens are producing a lot of data. We use all the Microsoft Big Data tools. We use aging site services to capture, manage, and process all this complex information. We use SQL Server in order to transform data into sites.
With Microsoft Cloud Office Vision, we had found the opportunity to move from data processing to data services. Using social network information and mobile apps, you can know more precisely the needs of the citizens.
When we detect some pattern that we have analyzed in this festival, the City Council can provide the best services to the citizens.
One of the problems in the big cities like Barcelona is transportation. So we follow the tracking of the buses, but also we follow the tracking of other transportation like bicycle. Processing the data, we know that we can distribute bicycles in a different way in order to connect with other transportations. That means that people are producing bikes in a more sustainable thinking. In the future, we are planning to have thousands and thousands of sensors in the city. We have to design our internal services for that kind of information. Today, we assume that computing in the cloud is the best option because you have the space you need in the moment you need. If both citizens and civil servants use the same information, we can go together to better solutions. Barcelona really wants to develop open standards to manage the cities. It's a worldwide initiative and Barcelona has been leading from the beginning.
Amazing how and what it can do. I wonder if it can also be applicable here locally. Then probably we can have a better transportation service. No one will get stuck in traffic for 3 hours in EDSA, right? A girl can dream. Plus, not to mention, the Catalan accent is so delightful. And did you pick up when they mentioned about using Cisco server and Bicing too, right? Alright, so moving along, our first speaker leads several teams deployed all over Asia. As you can also note on his bio, they work with large enterprises and governments to develop transformational business strategies that help capture a business value from investment and innovative technologies. Here to help you explore the information goldmine that is data analytics. A round of applause, please, for Mr. Shashank Ludra.
Thank you for joining us in this track today. I know you guys are extremely busy, and therefore we appreciate you taking the day out to join us. Karen did introduce me. What I would like to say a few words, though, is about what we in Cisco Consulting Services do. So Cisco Consulting Services has been around for about 15 years in a previous avatar. We were founded to help our customers navigate at that time, the trend of e-commerce. So I'm talking about the late 1990s. And now we are, and it was focused on a very small set of customers. We now focus on a larger set of customers, and we helping them navigate the transition that is the Internet of Everything, which is what Amir was from our group was talking about earlier this morning. So the idea is that, in simple words, it's you invest in a bunch of technology, and the amount of technology that is changing business is just increasing, as all of you are very aware. We hope that we can help our customers achieve the business outcomes they seek from that technology. So that's essentially what we do. I'm going to give the overview for the track today about how to capture value from that, and then we have colleagues who are going to talk through the next 3 sessions. So we're going to talk about racing cars instead, actually. And the reason I'm a big Formula One fan, and of course Japan was last weekend, and the weekend before that was in Singapore. So some of you may be wondering, not all of you, I think some of you are very happy that we're talking about Formula One instead of big data, right? But some of you may be, the rest of you may be wondering what the connection is. There, funnily enough, is actually a fairly strong connection. And the reason there's a connection is, you may not think of this as a big data machine, but it is. Each of these has about 150 to 200 sensors on every Formula One car. And when they're zipping around the track at 300 kilometers per hour, there's actually an on-track Wi-Fi network that's picking up those sensors. They're generating about 1,000 data points a second. They're generating about 30 megabytes a lap, and as some of you may know, each lap is only about 1.5 to 2 minutes, depending on the track. Right? The amount of information that's generated is huge, right? And they're generating that all laps every weekend, right? So here's the fun part. The fun part is the latest rules in Formula One allow every team to bring only 60 people to the trackside. Now 60 people may feel like a lot, but if you're familiar with Formula One, you realize that's actually very, very small. The bulk of the work, the bulk of the decision making and keeping track of your own car and other people's cars and all of that happens back at their factories, right? So you're taking all this data, right, the terabytes of data that's being created every weekend, and passing it in real time back to usually Europe, which is where most of these factories are headquartered, and people are looking at that and making decisions based on that. We're talking about a delay of 300 milliseconds from Australia, and when they're racing at Silverstone, a 7 millisecond delay. Right? And this actually means they can make decisions in real time. So in Singapore, Fernando Alonso had to make from Ferrari, soon to be not from Ferrari, but from Ferrari, had to make a very important decision about when to pit. And the head of strategy for Team Ferrari, who made the decision whether to come in at that lap for fresh tires or not, was actually sitting in Monza, was sitting in Italy. Right? So this is the power of the big data, right? And the reason I picked this and not a Ferrari car is actually because we found this quote by Christian Horner, right? Who at the beginning of this season, they're doing okay. Well, they're running at number 3 right now, not number 1, which is what they're used to. But they do talk about the network playing a crucial part in how they're going to develop the car, gather the data. So big data is in every piece, every part of our lives, right? It's when we're at work, when we're at play, when we are watching, people zip around, right, the track. So that's why it's important. And we're going to talk about 3 things today. We're going to talk about how that is changing, right? Data has been around, analytics has been around for a long time. It's become bigger over the last few years, and let's talk a little bit about how it continues to change. And what we as Cisco believe is unique about what we can bring to this change, or to help your companies address this change. And finally, a few case examples of what people are doing today. Okay, so data is exploding, right? You know these numbers, some of you have seen some of them before. These are big numbers. So to make them real, the way I like to think about it is, all of you are using, I see a lot of smartphones, I see a lot of photographs around the room. Right? You probably have more photos on that phone than your parents clicked in their entire lifetime. Right? That's the kind of explosion of data we're talking about. Right? Again, the challenge though is how you make something off that data. Right? And people are starting to do that. So if you look at these examples are specific examples of people starting to take advantage of the data. Big data by itself is useless without insight, right? These are people who are taking advantage of that. If you look at this example over here, right, the e-commerce example, that's actually Amazon from a few years ago. It's that recommendation engine that when you're shopping on Amazon, it tells you what other people have looked at. 30% of the revenue, or it drove up 30% of the revenue came from that. Right? This is Kaiser permanently. Right? Operating costs went down by 40% when they integrated the data across the various silos in that hospital. Right? People are starting to take advantage of it in meaningful ways. And I'm sure if in your companies, if you look around, you will find pockets of that as well. But what does it mean for us overall? Right? If you think about the overall impact of that, and Amir in the morning talked about the $19 trillion of value creation over 10 years that can come from the Internet of Everything. Almost half, 44% to be precise, when they evaluated the use cases, 44% of that 19 trillion will actually come from big data analytics. Right? So not only is it valuable on a micro level, it is very important on a macro level. And most companies adopt a very, very similar approach to trying to get this one. Right? So we talked about people, process, data, and things. Most of the value chain of that, however, works in a different direction. Right? I start from a thing, I collect the data, I apply some algorithms to it, and then finally get to action. And obviously, action is where the difference happens, or where the actual impact happens. Right? Most people follow the same process. What becomes different is the change that is affecting their industries today. Right? And we see change in three areas. We see customer behaviors, data sources, and analytics needs. So let me talk about each one of them and talk about this change. First, change in customer behavior. Right? There is a bias for action. People want decisions in minutes, actions in seconds. And I haven't seen it happen in this room yet. Well, maybe a few cases. People have checked email, right, since I started talking. We can't resist. Our behavior is such that we can't resist being away from that instant gratification anymore. Right? Your internal customers, your business stakeholders, they're not going to wait for 6 months for a new analysis, right, or a new way of tracking the data. They want it in weeks. They say my apps on my iPhone get updated every month. Why can't my data warehouse be updated every month? Right? So those are the kinds of questions we are starting to run into. And then here is actually the other fun part, right? The data sources are changing. We talk about data at rest and data in motion. Right? Data at rest has existed for a long time. Some things have changed even there. Right? So if you look at the data at rest, if you look at the data sources, we talk about 4 changes. We talk about a change in volume. We talk about a change in velocity. We talk about a change in variety and a change in veracity. Right? So the 4 V's or the 3 V's depending on how you look at it. Volume is here, right? Volume is that the amount of data I can store with the reduced cost of storage, the amount of data I can keep has increased dramatically, right? So the sheer volume of data that is there to analyze has gone up dramatically, right? Talk about variety, there's a bunch of unstructured data, whether what people are putting on their Facebook feeds, what people are putting on their Twitter feeds, what data we're collecting from sensors. It's not your structured data at basis anymore, right? So those were obvious. And then comes velocity. This data changes very, very fast. Right? When we talked about 1,000 data points a second, right? There is a big decision to be made. Okay, do I want to keep that data for how long? Do I want to throw that data away right away because actually it's not relevant? So there is a speed, or there is how long the data is valuable that is changing. Right? And then finally veracity. Right? Veracity is when all these changes are happening. What is the single source of truth anymore? Right? And being able to figure that out becomes very important. Sounds like someone's trying to start a Formula 1 car or something. So we talked about the 4 changes in data sources, right? Let's talk about the analytic needs that have changed, right? The expectations have gone up significantly. Probably the most important one is this one, right? Earlier you would have descriptive analytics, which is simply telling you trend lines, telling you what the performance was over the month, over the year, right? That has gone to predictive and prescriptive. The expectation from the data is, predictive is, based on what has happened, tell me what is likely to happen, right? How soon are my tires going to wear out in that Formula 1 car based on what you've seen over the last few races, over distance, right? And then prescriptive analytics. Prescriptive is, okay, based on all that information, tell me what I should do differently, right? In my Formula 1 example, it's about, okay, the tires are going to wear out another 6 laps. These other 2 cars pitted 10 laps ago, you should pit now, right? So they actually have algorithms running, and McLaren is in fact probably among the best at this, and McLaren has spun out a separate company. If you go and look at the latest Business Week, there's a big article about this, right? McLaren is spun out a separate company because of all the work that they did in this, right? They power all the telemetry sensors for all the cars. So they actually have algorithms running constantly, which says, okay, based on changing conditions, you should pitch now, right? So obviously it's the head of strategy who will make the decision, but that comes from the descriptive analytics coming from the system, right? This is another piece we like talking about, because what's happening is that the analytics at the edge is becoming much, much more important as the edge expands. Right? When we talk about the Internet of everything, it's the edge that is expanding, it's not the center. Right? What I mean by that is the number of sensors, the number of places where you can pull data from is expanding dramatically and very, very rapidly. Whereas the center, the data processing center, is expanding, but nowhere close to the center. Right? So these are the big changes, and these create a set of challenges. Right? I'm not going to read these codes, you can read them. What to me is interesting is that how much is wasted, right? And the fact that talent is going to be the key guy. These two are the most interesting challenges I see, right? Which is that to take advantage of all the data that you're able to store. It's not enough just to store it, how do I use it? And the challenge is then the skill sets of the people, right? The people that you're hiring are our own skill sets, right? Data scientist as a job did not exist when I graduated from school, right? But how am I going to adapt to that? How am I going to be able to leverage that? I think are super important. These two, I think, are more on the business side, and this is pressure which I'm sure all of you as IT practitioners feel, right? Or most of you as IT practitioners feel from your business. Because you get pressure from the business to move faster and pressure to take action. Right? Don't just give me a dashboard. Tell me what I need to do differently because my customer or my competitor is going to move much faster. We've talked about what's happening, right? We've admired the problem, right? Some of it probably resonates. Some of it may be new to you in the Philippines, but I assure you it will come, right? Given the changes that are happening and the connectedness of the world. What do we think we can help, or why do we think we can help? What is unique about what we can bring? Right? We are not across the entire technology stack, and I'll come back to that concept a little later. But we bring two very, very specific things that we bring. One is analytics at the edge. Right? It's moving the processing power to the edge of the network. And once you move to the edge of the network, you're doing the analytics there instead of moving all the data back to the center. Right? Let me give you a couple of examples. I'm talking about in the supply chain, well, slightly different supply chain example. We are in a retail store, right? And we've got sensors embedded supports, right? This is actually an example from one of our leading retailers in the world. We've got sensors embedded in the shopping carts. That sensor is throwing out data, right, every second as to where that shopping cart is in the store. Now, the only piece of information, one of the biggest pieces of information that is relevant from that location is when it starts heading towards the checkout counter, right? And that's actually the only time when I need the data to be taken back to the data center. So the ability at the router to be able to do that, to define that geo fence, right, saying, okay, when this cart approaches here, only then send a message back to the data center is an example of processing power, right? If I have 300 people in my store at any given point of time, that saves me a bunch of the network bandwidth and the data processing of the data center, right? Multiply that by 1,000 stores. Another example is actually from Brazil, right? From the video surveillance. We are able to now do processing at the video camera. Right? So when you've got the camera looking around, you can do facial recognition. You don't have to pass all that information back to the data center. You can set up algorithms that say, okay, when one of these 300 people or 500 people who are on our watch list gets recognized by a camera, only then you send a signal back. Right? So it's pushing the processing power. You still need the same algorithms. You're pushing the processing power to the edge of the network. Do it on the routers there because you're able to put that processing power there, which reduces the load on your center. Right? So that's one big thing we can do differently. The second thing is there's a bunch of data sitting in the network in proprietary places, like whether it's your call managers, whether it's in our routers, in our switches, right? And taking that data and marrying that with the enterprise data in real time, right? And we'll talk about some examples of how that works. Marrying that in real time is again very unique to what we are able to bring together. Right? I'm talking about data from call centers, talking about data from call managers, I'm talking about data from video cameras. There's data that exists more in Cisco specific products or Cisco specific hardware that we are able to capture and marry that or help you marry to that enterprise data. And from my point of view, that is actually two sets of advantages that will stay relevant, and that's not going to go away. Right? These layers, as you can see here, the public, the private, the Internet of Things, these layers they grow over time, right? Those layers are all network-based layers. The network will always exist in two key points: context, right, where I'm able to see where I'm collecting the data, right, where I collected it, from what sensor I collected it, right, what was the state of the sensor at that point in time, and action. Right? So if I'm taking action, for example, if I need to change the temperature in a container, in a shipping container because it has got too high, there is something that has to open the vent or close the vent, right? Again, there's a network that connects to that. So these two pieces exist and will continue to exist, which means that this relevance will not go away. Right? We talk about it, we are proud to say that, Cisco sits on the world's largest data lake. Right? 65% of the world's data from connected devices today, right? Not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, 65% of the data on connected devices go through some form of Cisco network. Right? So there is that kind of connectivity we have, which allows us to take the advantages that I just talked about and apply them. We don't think we're going to be able to do this by ourselves, which is why you see across the technology stack, we've done a bunch of partnerships, we've done a bunch of acquisitions. And that's how we think we can compete with ourselves more and customers. And by the way, this is true for everyone else as well. There are very, very few companies that could go across the entire technology stack. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing with these connected analytics offerings, and talk about a few case studies. Right? So these are 6 areas that we focused on. We focused on collaboration, right? We focused on not just the internal collaboration, but external as well. Contact center, how can I optimize that, how can I leverage that, and Graham's going to talk about in more detail about that right after me. We talked about IT, we talked about IT at the last session of today, where how Cisco IT is leveraging, how other, therefore, and by extrapolation, what other IT departments can do to leverage big data. Right? And then retail service provider, those are the other 3 areas where we are actually able to integrate. The other thing we talk about, of course, you saw Composite in the previous one. We have Jim here, who used to be the CEO of Composite, which is a data virtualization company that we acquired. That's the other session, that's the third session of the data. So let me go a little bit into what sort of case studies that we have, and talk a little bit about where we are able to take those, the things that I was talking about. So this is an example from banking, an industry very dear to my heart, and the impact of collaboration in that. So out of the 6 boxes you saw in the previous slide, this is the collaboration specific one. So this is actually one of the top 2 or top 3 banks in North America. They are our largest consumer of video collaboration, our largest consumer of telegram sales. And they bought 200 of them, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And they were, a couple of years ago, or a year ago, trying to figure out, should we expand this or not? The big question internally was, okay, did we get the return on investment that we thought we would get from this? Right? Some of you may say that maybe a question to ask a little late, right? But that was a question they were asking before they doubled down on that investment. What we were able to do for them from an analytics, from a connected analytics point of view. I remember I was talking about the proprietary data, right? So we were able to pull data from their telepresence units, from the call managers there, right? And we were able to extract the data of usage. So which calls are being made, when are they being made, how long do they last, what is the quality of the call, right? How does it end, right? So we were able to pull all of that data. The second thing we did, and this is where things get interesting, right? This is the marriage with enterprise data that I was referring to. We pulled data from their ERP system on their travel and income. We pulled the data for their travel expenses for the same time, right? As well as everything before. And we were able to plot how the travel expenses had gone down, adjusted for seasonality and adjusted for the overall business growth. How the travel expenses had gone down as the usage of the video collaboration had gone up. Right? So this is not a mystery, right? There's no sort of who done it at the end. There is a very, very hard ROI, 254% ROI, which we were able to prove based on this data. Right? So that was step 1. But then our team realized there's another interesting piece of data that we can apply to that, which is optimize the deployment of these telepresence units. What I mean, how do you do that, right? Or what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, once you pull the travel data, you can actually identify city pairs, right? The top city pair is usually obvious, right? I don't know what the top city pair in Philippines would be. In India, it's Delhi, Mumbai, right? Like 50% of Cisco's traffic is probably between maybe a little less than that is between Delhi and Mumbai. The interesting part is the other city pairs. And when you're talking about the US, this actually becomes fairly complicated. So the ability to pull data from actual travel data, right? Look at the city pairs where most of the air traffic happens. Remove from that the people who we know whose travel we cannot predict, right? Say it's people who are meeting customers, for example, right? That tells you where you should be putting these services in. So you're not guessing based on number of people in a place, but you're actually saying based on actual travel expenditure, where should I optimize? So we were able to lead them to over 20 to 30% higher utilization of their assets based on two things. One is relocating the telepresence units. Other thing we did is a root cause analysis of the units that were not being used versus units that were being used, and I identified 2 or 3 change management initiatives that were working. Right? Now, do you need to wait till you buy 200 of these units to do this analysis? No, right? Because the travel data analysis can be done upfront. So the estimation of the ROI and figuring out which city pairs and therefore where you can take a fact-based or a database approach to deciding where you actually want to put these services. Right? So this is an example of collaboration of what we have done. Another example from insurance, slightly different. The previous one was more about internal collaboration. This starts looking more at people calling in. Right? So this is one of the largest insurance companies in the world, and they had an issue. Right? The issue was that their marketing team wanted to understand the customer segments better. Right? And I'm not talking about customer segments based on age or income. I'm talking about behavioral segments. Right? And their challenge was they had a contact center, right? A bunch of people used to call them contact center, but there were a bunch of insurance agents, right? Spread across the country, and the insurance agents are not, people call them insurance agents. So what we were able to do for them, based on the data that we were able to pull from the call managers, is that because what was deployed in their insurance agent offices as well as their contact center was actually Cisco collaboration here. Right? What we were able to do is we were able to pull data from both of these places, and using the phone number as the identifier for the household or for the person calling, we were able to classify them in their segment and put all sorts of information about when do they call. Yes, I would prefer to speak to my insurance agent from my mobile phone when I'm on the road on Friday, right? Somebody else might, want to talk to them on Wednesday late morning after children have gone to school, right, from the house. So, and I always call the contact center. She always calls the agent. So you were able to get some very specific information about, okay, who do they like to call, when do they call, how often do they call, right, and what are they talking about. So you were able to extract that information from the call data records. And that helped in 2 things. One is it helped understand the segment much better. And if I understand the segment better, I can treat you much better. Second, more tangibly, they were able to come up with the best way to contract these customers during policy renewals. So if a policy renewal is coming up, and I always call the contact center on Friday evening, you're probably best served by calling me on a Friday evening from the contact center to ask me if I would like to renew. Whereas the other example I gave, it's better that her agent gets a reminder to call her on Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. because that's the time when she's probably likely to be free and therefore most of the people can call. So they actually adapted their call outs based on what people like to, or how people like to call me. Right? There's obviously an assumption there, but it has served them fairly well. They're seeing improved segmentation, they're seeing improved sales force productivity. So it's not people calling when they need not call, or it's not my agent calling me when I would rather speak to the contact center because I don't like my agent anymore or whatever the reason, right? But they are able to generate a lot of value based on mining call center and communication infrastructure data and marrying it with their enterprise data of segmentation. Let me talk about one more example, and this is actually now from a slightly different industry, right? Not financial services, it's from a utility. But again, lots of customers. And this utility had an interesting problem. They knew that they were going to have outages. They were doing some upgrades on their power generation infrastructure. They knew they were going to have outages. But they also knew that these outages were going to be in specific areas at specific times for specific customers. They figured that the best way to ensure that their customer satisfaction ratings or scores did not get affected was to proactively communicate this. Now obviously they sent out emails, they sent out mail, that's not enough, right? So what they did is they built in a campaign saying, okay, I'm going to figure out a way when people call the contact center for 6 months before the outages happen. I'm going to actually weave in my logic and my analysis to be able to identify this. So they did two things which were very interesting. One thing that they did was, when there is a connection, when people are doing a click to call from their website, right, they were able to take that information from the website and transfer it over to the customer agent, which allowed them to understand what they were doing before the call. Were they searching for outages? Were they looking at renewal? And therefore they improved that conversation between the customer and the call center agent. But also based on who was calling, based on that segmentation, whether this was a business or a residence, were they in a location with high outage or low outage, they were able to give a pop-up to the call center agent that said that here is what you are able to do with this customer, and this is what you should communicate. And that proactive communication is already started resulting in some improvement in the customer satisfaction. Instead of seeing a dip, they actually saw an increase. And the contact center costs are going down because the efficiency of that conversation is going up. So here is an example of an ability to take two different channels, the web channel and the contact center channel, and move information across them seamlessly so that when the customer is calling, you're able to have a much better conversation. This example, we probably end up talking about similar examples later today. This is also in the interest of time because we're running a little late, I'm going to skip over it. But essentially, it's the ability to pull together data from multiple source systems and bring that together to take decisions faster. It's an oil and gas example which resulted in basically a saving of almost 2 million per year because you were pulling data from a variety of systems and taking decisions about where to drill or how you're going to attack that problem in a much more efficient way. So the last part that I'm going to leave you with, right? The last thing I'm going to leave you with is that this requires a systematic approach. This requires a systematic approach that goes beyond technology. So this is a survey that we did in August 2012, right? The organizations that we surveyed, 1,800 IT professionals, said 4 in 5 analyze data today. Right? That people are doing, that's not the problem, right? But only 1 in 4 actually thought they were getting strategic value from it. Right? And over 1 in 3 said, okay, I need some sort of strategic plan that will allow me to actually get to that value. And we believe that there's 4 things that we need beyond technology, right? Or there's 3 things beyond technology. Technology is embedded in the last one. You need leadership. You need someone who's a chief data officer, or there is a person who has the responsibility of a chief data officer at a CXO level that is taking ownership of this, right? This is too big to leave it just to the IT department, if I may put it that way, right? Governance. What is the cross-functional group that is actually ensuring that this value that we are creating is being created in the right way, is being kept in a safe and secure way, and being analyzed efficiently? Right? So you need a governance model. You need capability. We talked about talent. We talked about how you build that up. And finally, the business and the technology architecture that will allow you to get there. Right? So these are the 4 pieces, and we would encourage all companies to put these into their strategic plan if they have to get value out of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shashank Luthra, for presenting the strategies involved in the big data analytics. Now, here to talk about the contact center analytics is a Scottish gentleman who's been jumping from continent to continent, selling software, perhaps in the hopes of developing more smart cities around the globe. Please put your hands together for Mr. Graham Dunn.
Anyway, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Manila. And the good news is it's not raining anymore, so we can all get home tonight. So I'm going to talk a bit about connected analytics, specifically around call centers, contact centers as they're more commonly known. Some of you maybe in the past have contacted some, say, contact centers from, say, Microsoft, for example. So some of those experiences were not very pleasant, for example. If you can remember being on hold for 50 minutes, waiting until someone picked up the phone and then eventually told you that you just had to reboot the machine and everything would be fine. Not exactly the best customer experience for people who had potentially pretty important problems. So what I'm going to cover today is the importance of analytics in the contact center, specifically around the fact that nowadays we have the option to extend the channels in the contact center to include lots of data sources. The Cisco approach, obviously, to how we intend to assist customers from an analytics standpoint, and then a couple of examples Plus, Gerard, my colleague, is actually going to do a demo, which is obviously probably the highlight of the presentation, because obviously you actually get to see what it looks like in real life. So I'll start with a question around customer churn, for example, because this is very important from a contact center standpoint. Every single interaction you have with a customer basically will determine whether or not that customer actually likes working with you as a vendor or a supplier, or doesn't. Which means obviously this then relates to financial decline or financial improvement. So if you look at the scenarios here, Gartner actually suggested that if you actually have a 1% reduction in customer churn, you actually will get a 6% increase in profit. So that's obviously very important from a financial point of view, that if you're treating your customers well, you're giving a good value of service, then obviously that's got an actual improvement on your bottom line in terms of performance. The three areas obviously that contact centers are interested in really is pretty much these three scenarios here. Customer experience, as I just mentioned, really is about enhancing that interaction with customers so that they actually want to do business with you. The revenue activities, more and more you'll find that contact centers are becoming profit and loss centers. So no longer are they seen just as a cost to the business. So therefore there are scenarios where obviously the contact center is actually generating revenue. Obviously you've got some contact centers which are purely outbound, but the scenarios here is that obviously if you're engaging with a customer, you have an opportunity to upsell and cross-sell different products and services. And then the last one, which is really the sort of standard kind of scenario we expect to find in any call center today, is obviously the performance, the operations performance, because as you all know, most call centers today, they all run on certain types of SLAs, certain types of statistics, call volumes, calls during certain times of the day, calls coming from certain parts of the country, for example. There's all sorts of statistics that are currently tracked today. In the Philippines, I think the report I last saw said that there are over 1,000 contact centers in the Philippines at this point in time. And about 270 of those are actually here in Makati. So Philippines is obviously one of the leaders in terms of contact centers around the world. So the business opportunity. So as we mentioned before, the traditional contact center was really around performance of the contact center, around the network and the agent's performance. But nowadays we have an opportunity to actually extend the kind of resources that we make available in the contact center by integrating a lot of the data that's in the enterprise and combining that with these types of traditional statistics to actually give the contact center agent a much better visibility of who they're actually talking to and the type of requirements that customer may have. So from a real-time point of view, in terms of interaction with customer, you actually have now a wider variety of options to include in that type of discussion with the customer, whether it's by SMS, whether it's by email, whether it's by voice, or the various different channels that exist today. The key thing is here is that companies who utilize the data are actually the companies who actually perform better in the future. So they become more efficient because they're utilizing all the assets they have in terms of data. And by doing so, they actually will increase their performance, and then obviously that would then put them ahead of their competitors. So the challenge really is the fact is, if they're going to use this data, how are they going to do it? Now, we'll come to how they're going to do that later, but one of the challenges is that, again, Gartner have already highlighted the fact that to integrate data with the contact center statistical information is actually quite difficult. And obviously, if you look at most organizations, you have data silos all over the enterprise. And to integrate those and make them actually part of an integrated solution is pretty complicated. And one of the things that Cisco does pretty well, and if you come to the session in the afternoon that's presented by Jim Green, he'll actually talk about some of the scenarios where Cisco actually has some solutions which allow you to integrate data very, very easily, and also in a real-time fashion, which means that you can actually have a very interactive session with a customer, which obviously is very, very different from the kind of interactions you can get today. So just some examples of the type of channels that you'll find in today's environment. Contact center is obviously just one area where obviously a lot of the calls will head to. But as you can see here, there's a number of other channels which obviously in today's environment are becoming pretty much standard. The kiosk, for example, I was in San Francisco a few weeks back and I rented a car from Paris. And I actually had the choice of going to a desk with a human being or going to a kiosk with a person on a video phone. I actually chose the human being. But the interesting thing is I actually have the choice there. People were actually deciding, okay, they'll take the video option because obviously they didn't want to wait. So these are all type of enhancements to the old traditional kind of call center that you're probably familiar with in the past when you called Microsoft, for example. No one from Microsoft here, is it? Well, they're not going to have that anyway. So obviously the key thing here is that you've obviously got a lot of back-end activities, back-end processes, back-end systems, technical support people, all sorts of different things in the organization. So effectively you can categorize these as being, one end is obviously customer experience, so that's obviously the front office kind of facilities that you have, where you engage with the customer directly, and then obviously the back end, obviously the productivity you get from enhanced services to the customers. The analytics, in terms of what types of analytics you can actually use, typically you've got two types. So descriptive effectively is what I would call business intelligence. Business intelligence essentially is looking at what's happened. So it's like looking in the rear view mirror. It will tell you what's happened and you can make some sense of that and you can make some adjustments to your performance of your operations based on what you see. And one of the examples you get from Jared is obviously how you might want to do that. But the predictive analytics is obviously where a lot of the investments are going in a lot of companies at the moment, because it's all very well looking back at what's happened, but if you can anticipate what's going to happen, then it means you can plan for that properly, you can staff it properly, you can have the right resources at the right time with the right skills, and it means, again, from a customer interaction point of view, you actually have a much better experience for that customer, which means hopefully they will actually continue to be a customer. So the predictive analytics is really the key in the sense that it's all very well just looking at what you've done, but obviously the key thing is why not use that and actually use that in a way which allows you to be more proactive when it comes to support the future. And the decision strategy really is just an actioning of some of the insights that you've gained by looking at that kind of data that you've got and interpreting it in a way that actually makes sense, and then a business decision will come from that. Business outcomes, obviously, key things from a metric standpoint, from a contact center. First contact resolution, obviously, the idea here is you cut down the number of calls into the contact center or the number of engagements you have, because obviously that's got a resource issue attached to it. Obviously, if you do that well, then your customer satisfaction ratings will generally go up. Clearly, from a revenue standpoint, if you're having upsell and cross-sell opportunities because your agents are much better informed about what this customer is that they're actually dealing with, as far as maybe certain types of products or maybe a buying history from that customer. Another example would be in terms of if you look at activity on a website, for example, people will quite often go to a website and men, as you probably know, are more keen to try and solve things on our own than actually try and call someone for help. So generally what we do is we go to the website, we try and find a solution ourselves, and then eventually give up. We call the call center. Now, if the agent has actually seen the fact that I've been browsing on the website trying to resolve this myself, and then when I call him, he actually is aware of what I've been looking for, then obviously he can interact with me in a way which is much more pertinent to the conversation or to the issue I'm actually trying to relate. So you have a situation there where obviously, as a customer, if the guy answers the phone and actually knows exactly what my problem is before I even talk to him, then obviously that's quite impressive. And then obviously the operational efficiency, again, that's really more your standard call center operations, I would say. It's not something that's particularly new. It's something that's been done for a long time in a lot of the call centers, and some of them are already quite efficient. But clearly, if you're looking at analytics on how things are operating, then you have an opportunity perhaps to do some fine-tuning. Shawshank's already shown this slide, but just to show the fact that obviously with Cisco we have a number of analytical solutions, some of them vertically orientated. The ones on the left-hand side are available now. The ones on the right-hand side should be available towards the end of the year. But the reality is here is that the principle is you gather data, you analyze it, and then you obviously take some actions from the results of that analysis. So some of the business insights focus on efficiency, business and operational enhancements. This area would be intended to cover areas whereby you're using maybe CRM data around the customer, so data about who the customer is, what they bought from you in the past. ERP data in terms of, again, maybe buying patterns and so forth, or even quotes that you've sent out. Any kind of data that relates specifically to that customer, which means that when you actually are engaging with that customer, you have a much better insight as to what it is they're actually calling you in relation to. And then in the 360-degree view of a customer, this is something we see quite commonly in a lot of customers in various industries. The idea of actually taking data from all the different data sources that you have around the customer and combining that into a single view means that the ability to interact with that customer is enhanced significantly. You see that in the banks, you see that in the telcos, especially where the ability to understand your customer better and then make better decisions around that customer are one of the things that is very high on the agenda at the moment. In terms of the analytics specifically for the contact center, there's a couple of components, or 3 components here. There's the integration software, which is the Cisco data virtualization component. This is the software that actually will go and get the data that will actually be used in the subsequent analysis. Jim will talk in a bit of detail about that this afternoon. The analytics software, so obviously when you get the data, you have to do something with it. So there's tools around which obviously will visualize the data, and you'll see an example of that when Gerald comes up shortly to present the demo. And then obviously the Cisco data and decision sciences. Really, this is the IP that Cisco brings to the solution, in the sense that we've been in this industry a long time as far as the contact center. We're number 1 in terms of the quadrant. And obviously the key thing here is that we've gained a lot of knowledge about how contact centers work. And we're actually taking that knowledge and combining that with obviously data that exists in the enterprise to give a much better view in terms of what our interactions will be with our customer base. Quite a busy slide here. So working from the bottom up. So obviously in the example that we talked about before, where we're combining different types of data from different sources. You've got data from your traditional sources like your CRM and ERP systems. You've got data that's unstructured, so tweets and blogs and Facebook and anything that's maybe in the social media environment where some of that sentiment is being analyzed to find out whether people are saying good things or bad things about their product. Then, of course, you've got the data integration part, where obviously all these different sources that we've referred to before, they need to go and get the data, we need to make some sense of it, put it together, and then obviously pass it up for the analysis feature, where obviously we try and make some sense of what the data is actually telling us. And there's obviously people with significant levels of degrees that are able to analyze this data and make some sense of that, which obviously ultimately ends up in some business outcomes that, as you can see in the talk, so some dashboards, some KPIs, and obviously some maybe modified workflow for how you process the activities with the agent. Some more examples, so segmentation analytics, text mining. Text mining is an example I mentioned before, where obviously if someone is browsing on the website, that data also can be captured and made available to the agent when the actual customer calls. I think if that was something where I was a customer and I was calling up and the agent already knew what my problem was, I think I would be quite happy with that kind of service. The sentiment analysis, again, is what I just referred to in terms of the blogs and the tweets. The social media obviously is very important. People are trying to make sense of what's happening there. And there are various tools that will do real-time analysis of the kind of comments that are out there, and then try and make sense of them so that we can then feed that back to the customer, feed that back to the supplier, who then can decide whether or not they want to proactively go back to that individual and maybe rectify the situation that may be causing them some distress, for example. And then the process metrics and insights, as I say, pretty much your sort of bread and butter contact center statistics that you would normally use in terms of call duration and obviously resolution times and so forth. A couple of examples from a case study point of view, and then we'll get on to the demo. First one really here is these are US customers, and I think this one's a public defense company. The principle here is they were receiving lots and lots of calls, and really they were effectively in a firefighting mode. So they were just taking calls, trying to fix them as best they could, without any real structure as to how they actually processed the calls coming into the call center. So the key thing here is that obviously you can't really continue to do that. It's just not cost effective to do that. You just run out of agents, the statistics are terrible, and the customer satisfaction level is generally pretty poor. So obviously what this customer did is they gathered the data together, they looked at the patterns that were clearly evident in terms of the type of calls we had, the fact that the call durations were too long, which implied that the training maybe on the agent wasn't good enough or not targeted to the right types of products, for example. So of course, by doing that analysis, then they were able to identify ways where they could actually highlight the call types with the skill sets of the agents, so that when the calls came through, they went to the right agent. The right agents obviously were skilled and capable of actually finishing the call, and obviously the customer satisfaction levels went up. And then the second one, which is actually what Gerard's going to show you, is the actual Cisco Technical Assistance Center, where obviously Cisco has lots of customers and we get lots of calls. And obviously our plan there is obviously to have as high a customer satisfaction rating as possible. Now obviously if we look at the type of calls that come in, we find that obviously that some of those calls are not being handled as efficiently as we would like. You see a lot of them being escalated. And obviously when you do the analysis on why they're being escalated, it may be that we actually have maybe some training issues, we maybe have the wrong types of staff on at different times of the day. We have maybe even regional variations where certain parts of the country have got higher call volumes and we're not really coping with the call volumes at certain times of the day. So from a Cisco standpoint, obviously we actually ourselves started looking at analysing the data that was coming in to see if there were ways where we could try and identify what these kind of spikes were. Typically the kind of spikes you would anticipate would be when you introduce new products. Customers obviously then buy the products, they then test the products and use them, and suddenly there's an influx of extra calls. Now obviously if you don't have the staff geared up to address that, then suddenly your statistics are pretty bad because you're not really coping with the volume of the calls based on the fact that the new product is typically going to attract a lot more tap calls than normal. And as you see here, the impact on the results here was obviously that we actually were able to make sure that the call durations were shorter because the training was better. The customer satisfaction levels were remaining high. And obviously the other thing is that when you start to analyse the type of activities coming into the contact centre, you're actually able to do better staffing decisions in terms of which people need to be on at certain times, cope with maybe certain types of even language support or certain types of product support. It just means that from a customer point of view, you actually get good service. And ultimately, that's really what the contact centre is all about. So really, just to summarise, I guess obviously from a Cisco specific standpoint, as you know, we're one of the leaders, if not the leader, in the contact centre technology space. We're a trusted advisor both to the business and the IT departments. Obviously, we have people like Shashank and his team who are obviously very much business advisors, as opposed to obviously just the traditional Cisco technology advisor as well. And then obviously now we have, with the acquisition of the composite product, we actually now have a team of people who are actually very, very skilled in obviously taking data and using data in some of the contexts we just described. So not only do we have the networking skills, we now have the data skills, which means we actually have some a combination of skills which actually is basically able to provide some of the solutions that we've just discussed today. and a single source, obviously, for all these different types of services. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to pass over to Gerard, who's going to give you a demo. And hopefully, we can do that now.
Give a warm applause with that.
To give a demo on the contact center analytics, we have Mr. Gerard de Guzman, the country lead for collaboration business for Cisco Philippines. I hear some stomach grumbling. I know for sure that you're all excited for lunch, but we're heading there right after the demonstration, so please do extend a little patience with us, all right? And just as a soft reminder for all of you, of course, Cisco Connect 2014 is not just about tech talk. It's also about connecting. And we would like to connect to you with some raffle prizes. I know there will be great connection with a lot of you with if you bring home some of those raffle prizes. So please do stick around with us for the raffle prizes that will be drawn later on right after lunch. And of course, we will be giving away a MacBook Air later on in the program. So if you want to be probably the luckiest among the bunch this afternoon, then please do look at the mechanics of our social media raffle mechanics right there on your tables. So you'd have to post some items on your Facebook and Instagram as well as your Twitter. I think we are just about ready, Sir Gerald.
Well, thank you. So I know it's already lunch, so let me be your appetizer for a few minutes. Yeah, this is just to close the session for this morning. But before closing this morning, allow me to share an analytics that which was crafted and created by Cisco Advanced Services. And as mentioned by Graham, I'll be discussing a demo about the analytics which is being used right now by Cisco Technical Assistance Center. So let me proceed on that. And so basically what you're seeing right now is the analytics which was, as mentioned, crafted by Cisco Advanced Services, which is being used right now by Cisco Technical Assistance Center. So this is a sample snapshot of where we are. Most of our outsourcing companies, some of you may know that we also outsource to our assistance center to an outsourcing company. And this is an example where we'll be able to see the statistics in terms of geographic, where we'll be able to know whichever state has a number of service requests in terms of volume. So for US, Cisco is a US company, majority of the calls are coming from California here. And then we'll be able to identify what particular or specific technologies is being created in terms of service creation. No? So these are the what we call the legacy technology. So these are the typical routing, switching, and then followed by, you can see here, which is another technology of Cisco, but bottom line here, we are able to capture a specific number of services being created based on the technologies. So think of it as your own product and services. No? If you're coming from bank, if you're coming from retail, if you're coming from oil and manufacturing, you'll be able to identify specific technologies or specific product which you offer to the customer, and to be able to identify whatever technology is being or normally being raised in terms of escalation. No? So, and then if we're talking of Philippines, think of this geography as Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So that we'll be able to understand where are the challenges and pain points. No? So from here, we'll be able to understand as well the volume of service requests on a per month. And if I'm going to take a look at, okay, what would be the service impact of this number to my company? So let's take a look at Texas, who has around 289. So in terms of service level, for some of you who are technical and keep on calling Cisco for some challenges or pain points on your routing and switching, So we have what we call severity. No? So from here, you'll see that a specific LAN switching is in terms of P1, in terms of severity. And of course, followed by 29%, okay, VPN and mobility security. So, but of course, don't think of it as maraming problema, no? So, I'm just sharing this with you. This is how you can envision your product and services. But not to think that ang dami na pala problema ni Cisco with respect to the product. So, but this is the analytics that you can use for you to make a decision. So, in terms of RMA, okay. Please take a look at, anyone here familiar with RMAs? No, mukhang maraming return. But the beauty of this technology, you can see na kakaunti naman pala yung RMA. No? So may mga counting addressable naman. So in terms of RMAs, 40% ang na RMAs, non-RMAs 60%. And majority again in terms of technology is yung legacy natin. Okay? And the same as goes on. So, however, we also managing our own staff. So, in Technical Assistance Center, we have solutions being addressed by non-CCIE and CCIE. So, if you're going to take a look, it's not about the capability or skill sets, but it's about what we call precision routing. So, in terms of severity, we'll be able to understand who could address this immediately. And most of the items raised to us is addressable by non-CCIs. So meaning, not that low priorities, but it doesn't require that high, if I may say, paying engineers. No? So this is how we use this analytics. And then followed by service request forecast. So how are we going to use the service request forecast? So we use the analytics in terms of trending. So if we're going to take a look at from June 2012 going to June 2014, we can see that there could be a spike. And therefore, we can allocate our resources by hiring or train again to address specific technologies that might spike on that specific season. So yung seasonal na tinatawag natin. No? Kasi more often than not, ito yung mga season na nagre-refresh din ng network, nagre-refresh, and then tendency, pagka naikabit na natin yan, nagkakaroon ng some cases that we need to address immediately. Okay? And of course, kung may mga challenges naman tayo, majority naman nare-resolve naman. No? So there's no need to, in terms of severity, so P1, of course, umaakyat yan, P2, P3, P4, and to P5. And again, related to the previous slide, or previous analytics, the legacy, which is the 2800 series, these are normally the one that being raised in terms of service. So, more often than not, our team from PAC will always advise, we have a technology migration path, and where we can replace the likes of 2800 to a 2900, and so on and so forth. So, through this analytics, we'll be able to make a decision and address the requirement of the customer. So, just to give you a snapshot where I'm coming from, I'm not a technical in the first place, but let me just share with you, at least before we go to lunch, is that analytics is being used for the company to make a decision faster. And we cannot deny the fact that these are the new norm. When we're talking of contact center, it's no longer just about phone. No? It's about from multi-channel to omni-channel. So where customers are giving an opportunity or giving a free hand to where they're going to raise their complaints and or their concerns. So we have branches which is now connected to the contact centers. And more often than not, people, if they cannot, they're not happy with the contact center, they will go to the branches and make complaints or at least ask for some assistance. So, customer kiosks, okay? And of course, as mentioned, which is a traditional contact center, which is called by phone, but we are now living in a social world. And people, if they cannot find satisfaction in terms of calling or going to the branch, they will shout it out. Facebook, no? Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. And ito yung mga kailangan na address natin. And that goes with the use of Web 2.0. So most of you here, if I'm mistaken, from the contact center, the challenge right now is that management doesn't have a single view of that reporting and analytics. And it became more siloed. And this is the reason why Cisco, specifically through our advanced services, work hand in hand with product, where I'm coming from, where customer will have a single view of the customer and unified reporting across channel. So the analytics that I mentioned earlier, together with the reporting tools, is now running in a single portal. And that goes with the analytics. So what do we mean by this? The benefit of which is that it's easy for management to make a decision. Rather than, okay, we were able to address a lot of calls. But mind you, there are thousands already shouting out about the unsatisfied services that your company is being provided. So these are the things that cannot be captured immediately. With this single view of reporting and analytics, we'll be able to address, and even the agents will be able to capture that, what's happening in the social media. So Cisco, through the analytics that I mentioned, is creating a single view of the customer and unified reporting. So, as I'm about to end, and that's the reason why Gartner, which is a third-party analyst, mentioned that Cisco is the safe bet with respect to the contact center. If you're going to take a look at here, okay, Cisco is the leader in terms of the ability to execute. This hand here is the ability to execute. And this hand here is vision. So this was last May of Magic Quadrant, where Cisco has the ability to execute their vision. And of course, when we're talking of collaboration, it's not just about contact center. It's always aligned with the likes of unified communications, like corporate telephony, and followed by unified communications and web conferencing, where Cisco was validated by Gartner as the leader. No? Okay? So what could be the impact of this in terms of market share and in terms of number of seats right now? So Gartner saw it that Cisco is the only one going up with respect to the market trends in the contact center in terms of revenue and in terms of seats. So this stats that came from Cisco, came from Gartner. So it always ties up with Cisco's ability to execute our vision. So with that, ends my quick closing of this session for this morning. So I'll give the floor back to our pretty lady. I understand it's 12:45. And again, thank you for coming and enjoy the lunch. Okay?
Thank you. How about a big hand for Mr. Jarvis, man? I don't know about you, but this whole tech talk is making me hungry. Are you also hungry? Yes, of course we all are, right? So at this point, we are about to embark on our lunch break. But before that, of course, let me just remind you that this will also be a good time for you to make that connection and take lots of photos for your entries for our contest. Later on, for the Chica the mascot will be also roaming around. So once again, for you to be a candidate for our raffle draw later on after lunch, and of course later on also in the back of the plenary at Isabella Ballroom. All you have to do is to read on our mechanics on our social media raffle. Okay, so later on we will be giving away a lot of exciting goodies from our sponsors. And speaking of sponsors, we would like to thank Intel, Dimension Data, EMC Squared, Fujitsu, F5, Microdata, NetApp, Panduit, TE Connectivity, VMware, and Globe Business. So once again, for those of you who have Facebook accounts, please do like and share Cisco Connect Asia 2014, and don't forget to do for whatever social media posts that you will have, please don't forget to put on the hashtag Cisco Connect with your post. So with that, please help yourselves for our lunch. The lunch buffet is located right across of our ballroom. And please be back at 2 p.m. for our next session. Exactly at 2 p.m. we will start. Alright, thank you and have a great lunch.